Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Sagalong 2021, my belated entry in Sagalong 2021, which is a BookTube event, some years of standing now, where myself and a bunch of other BookTubers read the Icelandic sagas, a great gem-studded treasure trove of world literature. And this year, we're doing things differently than we have in the past. In the past, there's been a sort of a la carte approach. We would each read some sagas and maybe come together in 1 week for one, or a couple of people would read the same one. But this year for Sagalong, we're all reading the same saga all month long, because it is the longest one of all of the family sagas. So it really needs a month, I guess, to do it justice. And it is Njal's saga, which was written about 1,000 years ago and is about 1,000 pages long and has about 1,000 characters and about 1,000 subplots. And one of the subplots involves a character called Bjorn of the Thousand Intestinal Worms. But nevertheless, we're going to attempt it. we're going to attempt this work. And for this first week, as you know already, you've probably seen all the other videos, we're doing the first 40 segments. It would be a disservice to the ghost of Charles Dickens to call them chapters. And that underscores the fact that a saga is not a novel. And that becomes important in the course of reading something this long. Because I think our reading tastes, especially in the West, are trained by novels. But one way or another, I first came across this work. I was first introduced to this work under the care of a very enthusiastic teacher, a very charismatic, enthusiastic teacher. And that was wonderful. Any of you who have ever had such a teacher will know that is a joy. And it's only now that I am reading this thing slowly and accountably. I am accountable, which is the great thing about read-alongs, is that you're not free to just wallow in your own conceptions, as comfortable as they may be, because you're reading it with other people. It's been thrilling watching the videos of my co-hosts and learning how they're looking at this thing. And that kind of free play of self-doubt and rival interpretations is done away with if you encounter a book with your hand in the hand of an experienced, intelligent, charismatic teacher. And I think that happened to me. Certainly, I have gone through most of my reading life since then believing that I understood Njal's saga, and that I kind of knew what was going on. And now that I'm reading it with close attention again, I'm reading the Magnus Magnusson translation. That's what this is. And now that I'm reading it again, not only am I wondering at whether or not being presented with a major work of literature by a charismatic, very involved, hands-on teacher has drawbacks as well as strengths, I'm also wondering a question that's much more familiar to readers of my to viewers of my channel, to endurers, to sufferers of my channel, and that is the whole question of the translator in the room. Right? We've come across this many, many times. We talked about it in terms of my mail hauls, in terms of the Daily Penguin series that I did, and that is, first of all, what is the correct job of a translator? The split has always been between literal accuracy and conveying the sense of a thing. So on the one hand, the literal accuracy gives a reader who doesn't read that language the sense that they are reading what is on the page of that original language. And a lot of readers really prefer that. They really like it, even if it makes the task harder for them. And the other way is, well, if I translate this literally, it's either not going to make any sense at all, or it's going to be a boring reading experience. So what I'm going to do is translate the sense of it. I'm going to translate as accurately as I can on the word-to-word level why the original readers of this would have loved it, why they would have read it. And you can, either one of those kinds of translators, my shelves are stocked with both, and either one can have their pleasures. And either one can also have failings. And the main failing that bothers me is what I refer to as feeling like the translator is in the room. Whether they're being completely literally accurate as possible, or whether they're conveying the sense, I want the feeling that they're not in the room. I want their main job, in other words, for me, is to be transparent. And if I don't feel that, I might appreciate their translation as a work of art on their own. In fact, I will. Most of the translations that I have on my shelves here at Hyde Cottage are translations of works that I can actually read in the original. So I am obviously enjoying them for the work of art that they are for the translator, not so much for the author. But even so, I want a large degree of unobtrusiveness. And I'm starting to wonder if Magnus Magnusson is the right translator for me. And the reason I'm starting to wonder that is because Njal Saga has had legions of readers and fans, people who love it. And not only in its own native culture, but in English language translation. And the version that I'm reading now, I don't see how that could be possible. There are large chunks of this translation that simply don't make any sense. Not on a word-by-word level. You always know line by line, moment by moment, what's happening. This is a fairly broad, multi-generational story at heart of a blood feud that metastasizes and grows out of control. And that original charismatic teacher of mine said that that is good for a thumbnail if you're pressed at a party, but that doesn't it almost isn't in any way accurate. That teacher of mine said it's a fundamental flaw to start asking what a saga is about. That is novelistic thinking, he said, and sagas aren't novels. They are much closer to chronicles, which is a kind of English language literature that has disappeared. So readers don't have any experience with it, and it's closer to that. It's closer to, I mean, there is a narrative thread, and there are. It's Frida of the Thousand Lakes. Yes, baby. Yes. Yes. She doesn't want me to sit up. She wants me. She's very protective. What was I saying before I started getting smooched? Right. Oh, right. Yes. The idea of saying, okay, what's this about? What kind of organic progression does it have from inciting incident to denouement to climax to denouement and whatnot? Asking those kinds of questions about Icelandic sagas is setting you off on the wrong foot right away. But even so, there is a cast of characters here. It isn't just a free-flowing thing. It's an enormous cast of characters, but there are names that recur, and there is a plot, basically a kind of plot. The main kind of plot involves two groups of people and their adherents, their friends, their allies, their servants, their wives, their mothers, that are steadily but rapidly progressing towards all-out war, through vendettas back and forth, progressing towards all-out war in a society that doesn't really want that to happen. And I get that, and I'm sure that will become more obvious as the saga plays on. But in the meantime, I am in the hands of Magnus Magnusson, and he has made some translating decisions right off the bat. His introduction to this volume is very, very good, but it's also very brisk. It's very good, but it's very daunish. It's informative to the reader, but it's also telling them that he's in charge and that you're gonna experience this work the way I want you to, and no other way. One of the most outstanding, noticeable decisions that he makes as a translator is to remove the genealogies of the characters to footnotes at the bottom of every page. In this saga and in many, many other sagas, when a character is introduced, the narrator tells you about them. It tells you their colorful sobriquet. It also tells you their parents or their illustrious grandparents or some famous uncle and all of their sobriquets. And it can go on for 2 or 3 lines. Readers of the Iliad will know, that it's in the nature of identifying famous forebears in your recited literature to do that. And Magnus Magnusson decided when he was doing his translation that gets in the way. So he removes that stuff. He gives you the name, but he removes all of the rest of it to a footnote at the bottom of the page as information for readers who want to know that, but so as not to impede the reading experience of readers who don't. And that seems like a small decision, but it's actually not. That's a large decision. That is not a decision that the original writer and the original readers, any of the original audience of this book, would have agreed with at all. They would have considered that violence to the text. And I get the impression that originally set my hairs on end, but because that tells me that I'm in the hand of a strong-willed, strong-handed translator who may not care whether or not I feel that he's in the room. The more I read, the more I think that is true. And I want to give you one example of that. one example from the 40 or so segments that we're reading today. It involves a warrior, a merchant named Hrut, who leaves Norway, who leaves Iceland to go to Norway, there to work out the details of an inheritance, and also to get in the good graces of the king, and it turns out get in bed with the Queen Dowager, with the king's mother, who, once Hrut's business is done and he wants to return home, where he has an affianced, a woman whose union with him has been agreed on, at the Althing, at this grand legislative assembly that happens once a year, where everyone comes, they pitch their tent pavilions, they exchange goods, they exchange gossip, they have massive feasts, and they get a lot of law done. They get what as close as they can to law done on minor and major matters. And it's already been decided that Hrut has a wife back in Iceland. But in Norway, he decides that make hay while the sun shines. And when it's time for him to leave, when he says, I'm homesick, I have business back home, I really need to go, he takes an honorable leave of the king, and he lies to the king's mother, who says, do you have a woman back at home? Basically, she asks him, do you have a woman back at home? Is that why you're eager to get back home? And he says no, when he knows that he does. And she tells him that she is putting a spell on him that will prevent him from enjoying that woman, because he wasn't honest with her. Now, right there, I started scrutinizing the text, because the Icelandic sagas take place in a world that is very supernatural, whether it's the gods and goddesses of the Old Norse culture, or the imminent, the spreading gods and goddesses of the Christian culture. One way or another, it takes place in a supernatural era, but this particular saga doesn't seem all that supernatural to me, at least to the point where we get to that moment. There have been hunches and great insights, and people maybe seeing omens, but there hasn't been anything in the way of actual sorcery. So when the Dowager Queen says that, I read it and thought, well, I'm not supposed to take that literally, right? It just means that she is predicting he will have bad luck. But she's not causing that bad luck, and she's certainly not altering him in any way. And he laughs. So obviously, Hrut thinks the same way. He doesn't make anything of it. He laughs it off and goes home and is married. And at the marriage feast, we are told that his wife is not happy. She grumbles and pouts throughout the whole ceremony. But nevertheless, they are married, and we are told that they live for a long time, but not as husband and wife, that something is stopping the marriage from being happy, i.e. consummated. And when the next Althing rolls around, she goes to it and meets her father, who is a powerful chieftain, and tells him that she's miserable and that she wants to divorce her husband. And her father says, well, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. What on earth is going on here? And she tells him. She tells him all the details of why she wants to divorce her husband. There's mainly one detail. We are told that they get along just fine, that he gives the entire running of the household over to her, and they are friends. They laugh, they drink together, they eat together, they entertain friends together. They're a normal married couple, except that they don't consummate. And she tells her father why they don't consummate, because every time they get hot and bothered, her husband, Hrut, experiences what we could diplomatically call the exact opposite of the curse of the Irish. And suddenly, it's not possible to do. Suddenly, the third party in the room is simply too big. Try talking about these things on a family channel, I tell you. And her father says, okay, I understand, and if you follow my advice to the letter, characters are constantly saying that in this saga. They're always telling other characters, here's my incredibly elaborate plan. If you follow it exactly, then it'll work. If you deviate in any way, then it won't. He tells her, if you follow my plan exactly, then all will be well. And the plan is, go back home, act like nothing's wrong, act very friendly, under no circumstances act like you have a problem, like you're angry or indifferent even, and wait for your husband to go on his business trips. This is a man who is a merchant. He is constantly selling and letting property and needs to be present for these faraway transactions in order to make sure they go right. And that when he is away, she is to divorce him. Follow the Icelandic law of divorcing him, which means take witnesses to their marital bed and say out loud the reasons why she's divorcing him, and then take them to the doorstep of the house and say the same thing. Her father tells her, in the lead up to your husband going away on his business trips, act like everything's normal, but when it comes closer to the time, act like you are taking ill, so that he will be very solicitous and give orders for you to be taken care of. She does all of that to the letter. And her father also gives her a route to take, a specific overland route to take to his own domains, that she should take with her retainers to make sure that no one in Fruit's land stops her. And she does all of that. Now, you can read between the lines and try to wonder why some of that is the advice that's given. Acting perfectly friendly and nice is to make sure Hoot's guard is not up. I can understand that. Acting ill might be the same thing, although I would think if you act ill, you run the risk of having your husband stick around, when obviously the main point of the advice about coming overland and waiting until he's out of town to do it is so that he doesn't stop you. Well, that plan would be absolutely ruined if Fruit decided, well, if you're sick, I'd better not go. But one way or another, he doesn't decide that. And obviously, the overland route to get to her father's domain is so that Fruit's followers, his retainers who are still at home, don't stop her, don't reclaim her and hold her captive or whatever until he gets back. One way or another, she reaches her father's domain and says she never wants to go back. And when Fruit comes home, he finds her missing. And doesn't act immediately. Instead, it all left until the next all thing. He goes to the next all thing, and his wife's father goes to this law rock, this formal place where law declarations, where public declarations are made, and says that she is divorcing him and that he's asking for all of the money back. Not only the money that he put up for her bride price, but the money that Fruit put up as well. Which, again, if you read between the lines, seems to say that he is saying this divorce is lawful and it's all Fruit's fault. And Fruit is outraged by that. He says, you're obviously putting this forward because you just want money. I don't believe that any of this, my wife has not said a word about me in public. I don't believe any of it, so if you want money from me, you're going to have to fight me, trial by combat. And Fruit is a he-man, and so his wife's father declines, to much mockery, to much jeering. He's willing to challenge the marriage, but he's not willing to put his sword where his mouth is. And we get a scene a little later on from this. Of course, the fact that the Fruit isn't willing to pay up doesn't mean that the divorce doesn't happen. The divorce does happen, and Fruit goes back home and to a friend's estate, where they are sitting by the fire. It's been a rainy journey, and they are sitting by the fire, warming up and whatnot. And there are children playing on the floor of this open lodge room, and the children are playing make-believe like children do. And one of them wants to play the part of Fruit's wife. I'm going to be Fruit's wife, and I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to lay grounds for divorce. And the other child chimes in and says, okay, well, I'll be Fruit, and I will accept your divorce proceedings because I can't satisfy you. And Fruit's host is mortified and infuriated and swacks one of the kids across the face, drawing blood, we're told. But Fruit takes the kid aside and says, just be more careful in the future. Here's a gold ring. No hard feelings. The child's very grateful, probably stiff-lipped or crying. And we're told that everyone admired Hrut's generosity in that moment, even though the moment makes it clear that his father-in-law, who originally told his wife, you can tell me, you obviously don't want anyone else to know, implying I won't tell anyone. Well, but it's common knowledge. I think the point of that moment is that Hrut's disgrace has become common knowledge, so much so that it's a children's game. It's become not only common knowledge, but a kind of quasi-folklore. One way or another, the boy goes, leaves the scene. We're told that people admire Hrut for his generosity. And then the writer of the story, we don't know who wrote this book. It's clear to me that it's one person, not any kind of committee, not any kind of successive rewritings. But the writer of the story tells us, and that's the story. That's the end of the story of Hrut and his father-in-law. And I know there's a lot more in the 40 bits that we're reading today, but I settled on that to talk about today because that makes no sense. That whole interval makes no sense at all. Am I supposed to believe that the Dowager Queen of Norway cursed Hrut with actual magic? Am I supposed to believe that two people who have everything to benefit from a marriage union would let this, so to speak, come between them? Am I supposed to believe? What am I supposed to make of this incident? And the reason that I'm not trying to obsess on this one incident, the reason I bring it up is because this saga is full of incidents like this. Yes, there are the major things about the steadily escalating antagonism between two family-grouped people, two groups of people that are based around the nuclei of families. But there are a lot of other incidents that are like this that seemed to me, when I read it carefully this time around, to be leaving something out. Now, whether that something was in the original saga and Magnus Magnusson either didn't translate it or did a poor job of translating it, or more likely, where it was in the air of that original saga. And if you were an expert in that saga, you would know the implications. And Magnus Magnusson knew them and didn't tell me. This book has, my version has plenty of footnotes. There were no footnotes to explain this whole anecdote with Hrut and his wife. None whatsoever. Except to explain the law involved in, his father-in-law's claim to money and whatnot. But not to explain what the whole thing means. What it means. What the writer is actually getting at in this whole thing. I am mystified what the writer is getting at. And I could have used a hint or two. And whether or not what the writer's getting at, that sort of atmosphere, you get this a lot in, for instance, the Iliad. There are moments in the Iliad that have, that when you're reading them, they have a great import. But if you don't know anything about the culture of the time, you're not going to know what that import is unless a translator tells you, and they always do. The shame of a night raid, the significance of the oldest person in the room being able to lift an ewer of wine when no one else can. On and on and on. Where if you read it just bald, you would say, well, that seems kind of odd. But the note makes it clear. The note explains it. Either the clarifying of the atmosphere around this anecdote, and by extension many other anecdotes in this saga, was there and Magnus Magnusson didn't translate it, or it wasn't there but he knew it and didn't tell me. Either way, I am thinking that we're doing the next 40 segments next week. I'm hoping to do my video on time next week. Either way, I'm thinking that for the next one, I will go with the Cook translation and not this one. I will switch translations for next week and see if it makes any difference. I'm curious to know that anyway. So and I don't think I've ever read the Cook translation, so I will switch to that for next week. I should stress, I am enjoying it. I am enjoying this. There's a kind of po-faced humor that surfaces very often, and there's enough violence to satisfy my inner 13-year-old easily enough. And once you know that everybody is touchy. Here, this is basically an entire saga that's populated by Klingons. They're all touchy about honor and they're all willing to pick a fight about anything. Even friends will take a seat in the long light of the afternoon, and one will say to the other, "I'd really like you to go and pick a fight with this person for me." And the other person will say, "I'm not sure that that's in my best interest." And the first person will say, "Oh, I guess you're a coward then." And they're supposed to be friends. But knowing that there are stakes like that involved in every aspect of this book makes it endlessly interesting to read. But I want to try a different translator. The issues of translation were on my mind when I was reading this. So I'm going to try someone else for next week's, and I will report back on whether or not it makes a difference. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. That is Sagalong for this week. We're reading Njal's saga. There's still plenty of time for you to get involved. I was only kidding when I said this was 1,000 pages long. You can easily catch up. It's fast reading, so feel free to join us. But I will wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.